The girl was in tears as she married the arrogant millionaire. But what he did that night broke her completely. Main characters: Aline White, forced bride; Linda White, controlling mother; Kevin White, ambitious father; Matthew Harrison, supportive groom; Becca, loyal friend. The preparations for the wedding had been underway for weeks, turning the otherwise quiet White family home into a buzzing enterprise. Aline's father, Kevin White, was a middle-aged businessman with an unflagging desire to rise above the modest fortunes he had inherited. He walked around in crisp suits even at home, looking like he was always ready for an impromptu investor meeting. At a glance, the White family appeared perfect. Kevin had the broad smile of a successful entrepreneur. Linda carried herself with the composure of a suburban matriarch who'd raised a well-groomed daughter. And Aline, at 21, had just completed her junior year at a private college. She was the type of young woman people often complimented for her manners and her gentle demeanor. Few knew that these mannerisms weren't by choice, but were constantly enforced by her mother's stern expectations. Outside on the pristine front lawn, a small crew erected a white silk canopy meant to serve as the area where the wedding officiant would stand. Aline observed them through her bedroom window. She dreaded what each hammered nail signified, her final steps toward a lifelong contract that wasn't hers to make. Inside her room, she had an array of notebooks and planners spread out across her desk. Aline had always dreamed of traveling for a year before settling down. She had scribbled down notes on potential routes: a summer in Italy, a semester abroad in Tokyo, a winter volunteering in Honduras. She wanted to see the world, share her experiences, maybe start a YouTube channel documenting everything, from local foods to cultural traditions. She even pictured the opening lines for her videos. "Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel." She had practiced so many times, but life had taken a bitter detour. She heard a knock. "Aline?" called her father's calm but insistent voice. "Come in," she replied, already bracing herself for another round of persuasion. Kevin stepped in, giving her a thin-lipped smile. He looked around her room, noting the neglected textbooks and the open planner with half-finished travel plans. "Everything okay?" he asked, though the question was empty. She forced herself to nod. "I'm fine, Dad," she lied. "It's normal to be nervous," Kevin said, gently patting her shoulder. "But remember, Matthew's family is doing us an enormous favor. Opportunities like this don't just come along every day." Aline felt her chest tighten. "What about what I want?" she ventured to ask, surprising even herself with the directness. Kevin's eyes hardened ever so slightly, and for a brief moment, his carefully curated fatherly aura disappeared. "Aline, your mother and I have worked tirelessly to raise you in comfort. It's time you show some appreciation. After this wedding, you'll be part of a powerful family, and we'll all benefit." With that, he turned and left her alone, leaving Aline to stare at the door, her emotions a storm of anger and betrayal. Only a week remained until the wedding day, and tension suffused every corner of the White household. Linda had orchestrated daily calls with event planners, florists, and caterers. Grand chandeliers were delivered for the interior, while elegant sashes arrived to adorn the chairs. Perfect illusions of happiness were meticulously sculpted from fabric, flowers, and decor. Aline retreated to the backyard whenever she could, seeking a moment of solitude by the rose bushes. These flowers had always comforted her. She remembered being a little girl, watering them with her mother in kinder times. Now, the once fond memory felt tainted by how forced her life had become. A soft voice behind her interrupted her thoughts. "Aline?" She turned to see Becca, her best friend since junior high, peering nervously around the corner of the house. Becca's eyes widened at the transformation of Aline's home into a wedding venue. "I can't believe they're doing all this," she whispered. Aline nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "I can't believe it either. I feel like I'm being paraded in front of everyone." Becca approached her and squeezed Aline's hand. "Listen, you don't have to do this. It's not the 18th century. We can find a way." Before she could finish, Linda's voice echoed from inside, calling Aline back. Aline cast her friend a desperate look. "They're watching my every move, but please stay close, okay? I don't know what I'll do." Becca nodded, understanding that her presence was Aline's only real lifeline. "Call me if you need me, anytime. I mean it." When Aline returned indoors, she found her mother waiting in the hallway, arms folded. "What were you two talking about?" Linda asked sharply. "Nothing," Aline mumbled, unable to hide the tremor in her voice. Linda eyed her daughter critically. "I'll be honest. I'm worried about your commitment, but this wedding will happen, with or without your cheerful participation." She brushed a stray hair from Aline's face, her hand surprisingly cold. "Now come along. The dress fitting is in half an hour." Aline followed her down the hallway, feeling her last vestiges of independence slip away, replaced by the crisp rustle of an unworn wedding gown waiting to claim her future. The first time Aline truly encountered Matthew Harrison, he arrived with his parents to finalize some pre-wedding formalities. Dressed in a tailored suit, he had the sharp, self-assured posture of a young man who was used to getting his way. He was about 25, with carefully styled brown hair and a confident stride that betrayed no sign of hesitation. Their parents sat together in the large living room, exchanging pleasantries that felt more like negotiations. Linda kept smiling politely, while Kevin discussed the marketing potential for an upcoming real estate project. Aline stood by the staircase, her posture stiff, trying her best to be invisible. She felt a shiver of dread at the idea of being his wife. At some point, Matthew glanced in her direction, and his eyes locked onto hers. She forced a small, polite smile, the only expression she could manage without crying. "Aline, dear," Linda called, beckoning her forward. "Why don't you show Matthew the garden? Let the parents have a little time to talk business." The last thing Aline wanted was to be alone with him, but she couldn't refuse. She led Matthew through the glass doors onto the patio, where potted plants lined the edges. Beyond the patio lay a manicured lawn, the stage for the upcoming wedding. Matthew cleared his throat. "It's nice here," he said politely. Aline nodded, keeping her distance. She stopped near the edge of the lawn and folded her arms across her chest. "So, I guess you're, okay with all this?" He tilted his head, catching the tense edge in her voice. "My parents have made a lot of arrangements. I've just gone along with it so far. To be honest, I haven't really thought about it much." She bit her lip, fighting the urge to unleash her frustration. "You mean to tell me you're about to get married, and you haven't thought about it?" Matthew pursed his lips, considering her question. He leaned against the railing. "I'm aware it's important for both our families. But do you want to be married?" It was an unexpectedly direct question, one nobody had bothered to ask her. She stared at him, then looked away. "It doesn't matter what I want," she said, voice shaking. "My parents have made it clear that this is happening whether I agree or not." A small furrow formed on Matthew's brow. For the first time, he looked less like a smug heir and more like a human being faced with an uncomfortable truth. "That doesn't sound right," he murmured. "I was under the impression you were as on board as I was." She gave a humorless laugh. Which is to say, you're not really on board? He shrugged, exhaling. Look, I've been taught to do what's best for the family business too. But no one said you were forced. I just assumed this is how modern arranged marriages are. Two families with common interests, the kids see if they get along, etc. I didn't realize it was a transaction. Aline swallowed hard, her pulse racing. She looked at Matthew more closely, trying to gauge if he was truly sympathetic or just playing a role. He seemed genuinely troubled. Well, she finally said, now you know. Matthew said nothing more as they walked back inside, but from the uneasy look in his eyes, Aline could tell something had shifted in him. Whether it would matter, she wasn't sure. The wedding day arrived in a blur. The early morning was filled with the hum of hairdryers, the frantic instructions from the makeup artist, and the rustling of Aline's gown. Outside, rows of white chairs flanked a long red carpet, ready for the guests who would soon arrive. Aline stood in her bedroom, staring into the mirror. The lace bodice of her wedding dress hugged her torso, and a delicate veil framed her face. She was undeniably beautiful, but in her eyes there was only panic. Linda swept in, lips pinched as she made final adjustments to Aline's veil. There, her mother said, stepping back. You look perfect. Aline swallowed back tears. Mom, she whispered. Please don't make me do this. Linda froze, the artificial warmth vanishing. You're just nervous, she said in a clipped tone. We have guests outside, and everything has been paid for. Don't ruin this day for your father and me. The wedding coordinator knocked on the door and poked her head in. It's time. The next few minutes blurred into a surreal montage for Aline. She was led down the aisle, the sun shining on the meticulously arranged flowers. She saw her father's proud smile, the envious gazes of relatives, and the glistening tears of sentiment in some guests' eyes. As she reached the front, she caught sight of Matthew, standing calmly in his tailored suit, surrounded by groomsmen. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw genuine worry in his gaze, but then he offered a polite, practiced smile. The officiant began talking about the significance of marriage, about love and devotion, about unity. None of it resonated with Aline's heart, which pounded with a mixture of fear and sorrow. Just when it was time for the vows, Matthew held up a hand. The officiant paused, confused. The guests exchanged glances. Linda and Kevin shot each other frantic looks. Matthew turned to face the crowd. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. Before we say these vows, I need everyone to know that this marriage has been arranged as part of a business deal. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Linda's face went pale. Kevin opened his mouth to object, but Matthew continued. Aline has never agreed to this willingly, and I can't stand here and pretend otherwise. Aline felt her heart skip a beat. She stared at Matthew, disbelief and a glimmer of hope warring inside her. A stunned hush fell over the gathering. Then chaos erupted. The officiant looked flustered, not sure how to proceed. Linda let out a strangled protest, and Kevin stepped forward, fury contorting his features. You can't do this, Kevin hissed at Matthew. You're ruining everything. Matthew stood his ground. I'm sorry, Mr. White, but I won't force someone into a marriage. Aline glanced around, feeling the weight of 100 gazes on her. Her cheeks burned. She had never been the center of a spectacle like this before, and it was terrifying. But in that terror, she found a shard of relief. Suddenly, Matthew gently took her hand. Aline, he whispered, if you want to leave, I'll make sure you can. She stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know what to say. He squeezed her fingers. Then don't say anything. Just go. Kevin grabbed Matthew by the shoulder, but Matthew spun away, stepping toward the stunned crowd. Go, he urged Aline once more. Aline turned, hitching up the hem of her dress as she ran back up the aisle. Cameras flashed, guests murmured, and some even tried to stand in her path. She pushed past them, breath ragged, tears streaming down her cheeks. All she could think was, I can't believe this is happening. Aline burst through the doors into the house and sprinted upstairs to her room. Throwing off the veil, she stuffed a small backpack with essentials, her wallet, phone, charger, and a few personal keepsakes she could grab in a heartbeat. The wedding gown hindered her movement, tangling around her ankles, but she tugged at it, ripping the delicate fabric in places as she wrestled it off. Then she pulled on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, her hands trembling in urgency. As she was about to leave, the bedroom door flung open, and she saw Linda, eyes wild. What are you doing? Her mother shrieked. Aline pressed a hand to her racing heart. I'm leaving. Don't be ridiculous, Linda spat, lunging to grab her daughter's arm. Think of everything we've done for you. You can't just throw it all away. Aline pulled free with more force than she knew she possessed. I never asked for any of this, she cried. You sold me for your own ambitions. Her mother recoiled, momentarily speechless. Taking advantage of that instant, Aline dashed out into the hallway. She nearly collided with Matthew, who stood there holding an envelope. He looked different now, disheveled, uncertain but resolved. Take this, he said, pressing the envelope into her hands. It's not much, just a few $1,000s I had set aside, but it should help you get away. I'll deal with your parents. Just run. Aline stared at him, tears forming anew. Thank you, she whispered, unable to fully express her gratitude. Before either of them could say more, Kevin thundered up the stairs, his anger radiating in waves. You ungrateful brat! He yelled at Aline. And you! He added, glaring at Matthew. Do you have any idea what you've just ruined? Dad, I'm done listening to you, Aline said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. She clutched the envelope, stepping around him. I'm leaving. Let me go. Kevin made a grab for her, but Matthew blocked him. Let her go, Matthew said firmly, his eyes flashing with defiance. Aline used the opportunity to slip past and thunder down the stairs. Bursting into the driveway, she found Becca, who had watched the chaos unfold from a distance. She waved her over. Oh my God, are you okay? Becca asked, her voice shaking with a mix of shock and relief. Aline held up the envelope. I have enough money to get somewhere safe. Will you drive me? Becca grabbed her keys from her purse. Let's go. They jumped into Becca's car, and the engine roared to life. Aline glanced one last time at the house that had been her prison for the past year of forced compliance. Guests were milling around, uncertain and scandalized, while her parents stood in the doorway, outraged and helpless. As they sped away, adrenaline surged through Aline's veins. She looked at Becca, tears slipping down her cheeks. I never thought I'd get out, she whispered. Becca reached over to squeeze her hand. Now you can finally do everything you dreamed of. They drove for hours, eventually pulling into a quiet motel outside the city. Aline paid for a room with some of the money Matthew had given her. The place was modest, a single bed and a small bathroom, but it felt like a palace of freedom compared to the gilded cage she'd left behind. Exhausted, Aline collapsed on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Memories of the day played in her mind, like a chaotic movie reel. Linda's icy voice, Kevin's furious glare, Matthew's surprising act of kindness, the vow that never happened, the moment she had sprinted back up the aisle, her heart hammering, determined to break free. She opened her phone, quickly scanning through the messages and missed calls, dozens from her parents, from relatives, from unknown numbers, and then one from Matthew. "I really hope you're okay. Good luck with everything." Aline breathed a shaky sigh. She texted him back a simple, "Thank you." She owed him more than words, but those two felt the most urgent. Days passed in a haze of cautious relief. She and Becca discussed plans in whispers, worried that her parents might try to track her down. But each passing sunrise felt like a step closer to real independence. She could finally decide what to do next. Whether that was traveling the world, starting her YouTube channel, or even just building a life free of the manipulative hold her parents had wielded for so long. The scandal around the canceled wedding reverberated through both families. Rumors flew. Some insisted that Aline had run off with another man. Others said that Matthew had turned out to be a villain. But soon the uproar began to fade in the face of new gossip, fresh controversies. Eventually, neither the Whites nor the Harrisons could do much to salvage their damaged reputations, let alone restore the business deal. Sitting in a small cafe one sunny afternoon, Aline opened her laptop. She typed a tentative script for her very first YouTube video. Her hands trembled slightly, but it wasn't fear that made them shake. It was excitement. "Hey everyone, welcome to my channel," she typed. "I'm Aline, and today I want to talk about taking control of your own destiny. Not so long ago, I thought my path was set in stone by others. Now I realize I can break free, and so can you." Outside, the California sun was setting in shades of pink and orange, hinting at the promise of a new dawn to come. Aline shut her laptop, smiled to herself, and stepped out into the world. She was finally free.